But you also recently said that the Middle East would be better off with Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and Assad in power. How does...
I didn't say Assad, but we certainly have not gained anything with Gaddafi. And you look at what happened. I mean, look at Libya. I'm not saying he was a nice guy. He was a horrible guy. But it was a lot better than it is right now. Right now, Libya, nobody even knows Libya. Frankly, there is no Iraq and there is no Libya. It's all broken up. They have no control. Nobody knows what's going on.
The world would be better off with Saddam Hussein
100%.
and Gaddafi in power?
100%. Now, as far as Assad is concerned.
What about the human rights abuses?
Let's talk, well, you don't think they're happening now? They're worse now than they ever were?
The story begins with a silence that few dared to question. A silence that hides behind diplomatic smiles and political shadows. But what if I told you that the son of Muammar Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, may have re-entered the global stage through a secret back channel connected to none other than Donald Trump's team? Why now? Why after all these years of exile, accusations, and silence from the Libyan desert? 20 seconds into this story, one question must be asked. What could possibly unite two men once condemned by the same Western establishment that now trembles at the thought of their return? Before we grasp how we arrived here, to this unexpected contact between Saif al-Islam and Trump's circle, we have to go back. Back to the ruins of 2011, when the skies above Libya burned with the approval of Washington and the European Union, and the so-called Arab Spring turned into a graveyard for sovereignty. According to the CNN report Trump, world would be 100% better with Hussein, Gaddafi in power. Donald Trump once declared that the world would be far safer if both Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi were still alive. A statement that sounded absurd at the time. But what if it was more than nostalgia? What if it was a signal, a reflection of a deeper frustration within Washington itself? Now, years later, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the heir to Libya's most controversial legacy, reportedly reached out to Trump's network through unofficial mediators. A message was even sent to former British Prime Minister David Cameron, a man who once stood among those calling for his father's downfall. But why Cameron? Why bring the architect of Libya's collapse into this story again? According to statements from the American delegate to the UN Security Council, the United States insists that Saif al-Islam must still face justice for the crimes attributed to him. Yet, behind these words, another question arises: justice or fear of his political resurrection? To understand what this contact truly means, we must trace the web that connects Washington's old wars to the new alliances forming across Africa and the Middle East. Because this story isn't only about Libya. It's about power, redemption, and the ghosts of leaders that the West thought it had buried forever. To grasp Saif al-Islam's re-emergence and the meaning behind his contact with Donald Trump's circle, we must return to the moment everything changed, 2011, the year when NATO jets darkened the Libyan skies, and the echoes of war silenced a nation that once dreamed of becoming Africa's gateway to independence. It began with promises of democracy, but behind every promise stood Washington, London, and Paris, each with their own reasons to see Muammar Gaddafi erased. According to declassified reports and statements from Western officials, the decision to overthrow Gaddafi wasn't only about human rights or freedom. It was about currency, influence, and control over Africa's future. Gaddafi's ambition to create a unified African currency backed by gold terrified both the European Union and the United States. Imagine an Africa trading in its own gold-backed dinar, no longer dependent on the dollar or the euro. That vision alone was enough to mark him for destruction. Saif al-Islam, his son and political heir, was different from his father. Educated in London, fluent in English, and connected with Western elites, he was seen as the acceptable face of Libya. But when the war began, those same elites turned their backs. According to diplomatic cables later revealed, European leaders feared that if Saif survived, he could rebuild his father's influence with a modern and strategic approach. That fear turned him into a target. As the bombs fell over Tripoli, Saif disappeared. For years, rumors spread: captured, killed, imprisoned, released. The truth remained a mystery until 2017, when reports confirmed he was alive. Since then, he has remained silent, resurfacing only in moments of political tension, as if waiting for the perfect storm to return. But what drives him now? Is it revenge, redemption, or a calculated plan to reclaim what was taken from his family and his nation? And why reach out to Donald Trump's network, a man who once said that the world would be 100% better if Gaddafi and Hussein were still in power? Answer that, we must look at Libya today, a country torn between militias, foreign interests, and hidden deals. Washington still seeks to control its oil. Europe wants to stop the flow of migrants. And Russia, Turkey, and China see Libya as the last frontier of influence in North Africa. Somewhere within this chaos, Saif al-Islam moves like a ghost, speaking through intermediaries, sending messages to old enemies like David Cameron, and testing the reaction of a world that once hunted him. According to recent statements from the American delegation to the Security Council, efforts to pursue and arrest Saif al-Islam Gaddafi are still ongoing. But behind this diplomatic language, another truth hides. Perhaps Washington no longer fears his crimes, but the idea of his comeback. And that raises a darker question. Could the son of Gaddafi become the symbol of a new anti-Western movement across Africa? One that rejects the systems imposed by the IMF, the World Bank, and Western governments since his father's fall. To fully grasp Saif al-Islam's strategy and the stakes for Washington, we must look at Libya today and its role in the broader African context. Since Gaddafi's fall in 2011, Libya has been trapped in chronic political and military instability. Local militias, often backed by foreign powers, control different regions, creating a fragmented state. But why has this vacuum persisted for over a decade? And how does it create the perfect opportunity for Saif al-Islam's return? According to international security analysts, Libya's fragmentation was not only the result of war, but also deliberately shaped by external powers. The United States sought continued access to Libyan oil. The European Union aimed to manage migration flows. And Russia, Turkey, and China see Libya as a strategic foothold in North Africa. But what if Saif al-Islam realized this division could be turned to his advantage? Not just in Libya, but as a leverage point across the African continent. Since his public reappearance in 2017, Saif has maintained a low-profile strategy, communicating through intermediaries and sending targeted messages to key figures, including former British Prime Minister David Cameron. But why Cameron? Why involve someone directly linked to his father's downfall? Perhaps the answer lies in signaling power, showing that even those who once sought to destroy his family are still within reach of his influence. And what about Donald Trump's interest in this scenario? CNN reports that Trump once stated the world would be 100% better if Gaddafi and Hussein were still in power. But is this merely nostalgia? Or does it reflect a recognition within certain circles in Washington that Saif al-Islam could become a strategic player in African geopolitics? The bigger picture is clear. Libya is not just a country in conflict. It is a chessboard for global influence. Every militia, every border, every negotiation is observed by international powers. And Saif al-Islam, cautious yet strategic, seems to be mapping exactly where he can act to regain influence. But beyond Libya, what does this mean for Africa as a whole? Could Saif al-Islam's return signal a shift in the continental balance of power, challenging the dominance of Washington and the European Union? Could alliances be forming behind the scenes that link North African influence with sub-Saharan politics, gold-backed economies, and anti-Western coalitions? These questions remain unanswered, yet they may define the future of African geopolitics. To grasp the true weight of Saif al-Islam's movements, we must look beyond Libya to Africa as a whole. The continent is no longer a passive stage. It has become the arena where global powers quietly compete for influence. According to reports from African policy analysts, nations rich in resources, gold, oil, and strategic minerals are constantly courted by the United States, European Union, Russia, and China. But what if Saif al-Islam intends to position himself at the center of this contest, leveraging Libya as his launchpad? Since the fall of Gaddafi, Libya's instability has affected neighboring countries. Smuggling networks, unregulated militias, and the flow of weapons have reached across borders, destabilizing the Sahel and parts of West Africa. Saif's potential return could shift this balance. Could he unify factions under his influence, not just in Libya, but in the wider region? And if so, who would support him? Moscow, Beijing, or other African leaders seeking autonomy from Western control? Evidence of these dynamics appears in multiple reports. Analysts cite that Gaddafi's dream of an Africa-wide gold-backed currency continues to inspire certain political circles in West Africa. If Saif al-Islam can revive this vision, it would threaten the financial dominance of both Washington and the European Union over the continent. Could this be the hidden reason behind his secret communication with Donald Trump's network? To gauge how far the West would tolerate his resurgence before intervening. Furthermore, Africa today is a continent divided yet interconnected. The African Union, regional coalitions, and resource-based economies create a complex web of power. Saif's strategy might not be limited to direct leadership. It could involve influencing allies, creating informal partnerships, and quietly reshaping the geopolitical landscape. Could he be preparing to challenge the Western-aligned governments, positioning himself as a new figure capable of bridging North Africa with Sub-Saharan Africa in a network independent from Western control? And finally, a deeper question emerges. If Saif al-Islam succeeds in rebuilding influence across Africa, how will Washington and the European Union react? Will they attempt containment, or could they see a pragmatic alliance in the making? And what about China and Russia? Will they provide support to counterbalance Western influence, as they have in other parts of the continent? The answers to these questions are hidden behind layers of diplomacy, intelligence operations, and silent negotiations. But they could define Africa's political and economic future for decades.